Hi, welcome to part two in our discussion of Indian and Southeast Asian art. In our last segment, we started to look at Hindu architecture. We're going to be looking at another temple. This is an aerial view of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Just to give you some more information about Hindu architecture in general. The Hindu temple is not a hall for congregational worship, the way we think of a basilica church. Instead, it is the residence of a god. The temples are built within interior rooms, just enough space for a priest and individual worshippers. At the center is a teeny interior cella that is called the womb of the world. We talked about that in our last segment, where the sacred statue invoked with the main deity is placed. Although Indians knew um, the ark, they preferred corbelled vaulting technique to create a cave-like look of the inside. Thick walls protect the deity from outside forces. An antechamber where ceremonies are prepared precedes the cella, and a hypostyle hall is visible from the outside where congregants can participate. Hindu temples are constructed amid a temple complex that includes subsidiary buildings, so you can kind of see that here in this aerial view. In northern India, temples have a more vertical character with large towers setting the decorative scheme and other subsidiary towers imitating the shape but at various scales. Placed on high pedestals, temples have a sense of grandeur as they command the countryside. Major temples form temple cities in South India, where layers of concentrated gated walls surround a network of temples, shrines, pillared halls, and colonnades. The Hindu temple found in Cambodia are based on a pyramidal plan with a central shrine surrounded by sub-shrines and enclosed walls. Temple exteriors are covered with sculpture, almost in a feverish frenzy to crowd every blank space on the surface. Another term for that is hor vacui, and we'll talk about that when we look at some of these friezes. So this is referred to as a temple with a lost name. Angkor Wat in Cambodia is the largest religious monument in the world. Angkor Wat, translated from Khmer, the official language of Cambodia, literally means city temple. As far as names go, this is as generic as it gets. Angkor Wat, not the original name given to the temple when it was built in the 12th century. We have little knowledge of how this temple was referred to during the time of its use, as there are no exact texts or inscriptions that mention the temple by name. This is quite incredible if we consider the fact that Angkor Wat is the greatest religious construction project in Southeast Asia. So it is unusual that there isn't any sort of documentation. A possible reason why the temple's original name may have never been documented is that it was such an important and famous monument that there was no need to refer to it by its name. We have several references to the king who built the temple, King Surya Varaman II, and events that took place at the temple, but no mention of its name. Angkor Wat is dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu. We saw a bronze statue of him in our last segment, who was one of the three principal gods in the Hindu pantheon. Shiva and Brahma are the others. Among them, he is known as the protector. The major patron of Angkor Wat was King Suryavaraman II, whose name translates as the protector of the sun. Many scholars believe that Angkor Wat was not only a temple dedicated to Vishnu, but that it was also intended to serve as the king's mausoleum in death. The construction of Angkor Wat likely began in the year 1116 CE, 3 years after King Suryavarman II came to the throne, with construction ending in 1150, shortly after the king's death. Evidence for these dates come in part from inscriptions, which are vague, but also from the architectural design and artistic style of the temple and its associated sculptures. The building of temples by Khmer kings was a means of legitimizing their claim to political office and also to lay claim to the protection and powers of the gods. Hindu temples are not a place for religious congregation. Instead, they are homes of the gods, and that's very similar to ancient Greek, the way they use their temples. In order for a king to lay claim to his political office, he had to prove that the gods did not support his predecessor or his enemies. To this end, the king had to build the grandest temple palace for the gods, one that proved to be more lavish than any other previous temple. In doing so, the king could make visible his ability to harness the energy and resources to construct the temple and assert that his temple was the only place that a god would consider residing in on earth. And I think you can also make some really interesting cross currents with Egyptian temples as well. The building of Angkor Wat is likely to have necessitated some 300,000 workers, which included architects, construction workers, masons, sculptors, and the servants to feed these workers. Construction of the site took over 30 years and was never completely finished. The site is built entirely out of stone, which is incredible as a close examination of the temple demonstrates that almost every surface is treated and carved with narrative or decorative details. There are 1,200 square meters of carved bas-reliefs at Angkor Wat, representing 8 different Hindu stories. Perhaps the most important narrative represented at Angkor Wat is the churning of the ocean of milk, which you see here, which depicts a story about the beginning of time and the creation of the universe. It is also a story about the victory of good over evil. In the story, Devas, Devas, or gods, are fighting the Asuras, Asuras, and these are demons, in order to reclaim order and power for the gods who have lost it. In order to reclaim peace and order, the elixir of life, Amrita, Amrita, needs to be released from the earth. However, the only way for the elixir to be released is for the gods and demons to first work together. To this end, both sides are aware that once the Amrita is released, there will be a battle to attain it. The release depicts the moment when the two sides are are churning the ocean of milk. In the detail above, you can see that the god and demons are playing a sort of tug of war with the Naga or Serpent King as their divine rope. The Naga is being spun on Mount Mandara, represented by Vishnu, and he's in the center. Several things happen while the churning of milk takes place. One event is that the foam from the churning produces apsaras, or celestial maidens, who are carved in relief throughout Angkor Wat. So that is spelled Apsaras. So these are celestial maidens. We see them here on either side of Vishnu, above the gods and demons. Once the elixir is released, Indra, the Vedic god who is considered the king of all the gods, is seen descending from heaven to catch it and save the world from the destruction of the demons. An aerial view of Angkor Wat demonstrates that the temple is made of an expansive enclosure wall which separates the sacred temple grounds from the protective moat that surrounds the entire complex. The moat is visible in the photograph that you see here in front of you. The temple proper is comprised of 3 galleries, a passageway running along the length of the temple, with a central sanctuary marked by 5 stone towers. The 5 stone towers are intended to mimic the 5 mountain ranges of Mount Meru, the mythical home of the gods, for both Hindus and Buddhists. The Temple Mountain as an architectural design was invented in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asian architects quite literally envisioned temples dedicated to Hindu gods on earth as representations of Mount Meru. The galleries and the empty spaces that they create between one another and the moat are envisioned as the mountain ranges and oceans that surround Mount Meru. Mount Meru is not only home to the gods, it is also considered an axis mundi. An axis mundi is a cosmic or world axis that connects heaven and earth. We'll be talking a little bit about that more with Buddhism, and we also talked about it when we were looking at Mayan or we were looking at Mesoamerican, indigenous American art as well. And that is spelled AXIS dash MUNDI, Axis Mundi. So that's a vocab that you really need to know. And many religious cultures incorporate that idea. In designing Angkor Wat in this way, King Suryavarman II and his architects intended for the temple to serve as a supreme abode for Vishnu. Similarly, the symbolism of Angkor Wat serving as an axis mundi was intended to demonstrate the Angkor kingdoms and the king's central place in the universe. In addition to envisioning Angkor Wat as Mount Meru on Earth, the temple's architects, of whom we know nothing, also ingeniously designed the temple so that embedded in the temple's construction is a map of the cosmos, mandala, Mandala, as well as a historical record of the temple's patron. In 1181, Jayavarman VII became king and established a new capital, Angkor Thom, Thom. And again, I know I'm probably mispronouncing all these words, and I apologize. During his reign, the Cambodian kingdom spanned a huge area extending beyond the Minam Basin to the west. Um, the Bayon inscription mentions the existence of two statues of divinities guarding the city of Ratchaburi and Phetchaburi in Thailand, as far as the sea coast of Champa to the east, and as far as the city of Sokohuate, which was supervised by Khmer functionaries in the north, all the way down to the southern sea. At the time, the Khmers were trading with China, India, and other countries of Asia Minor. King Jayavarman VII was greatly concerned with the well-being of his kingdom, and he wanted to turn it into an earthly paradise. The Ta Prohm inscription comments on this subject, um, and this is a quote. He found satisfaction in the nectar of his religion. The Sakyamun Buddhism of the Great Vehicle, within which he identified a cult of deceased relatives with the characteristics of the compassionate Bodhisattva and Parjamarita. With regard to the arts, the king was responsible for the construction of numerous temples in Angkor region and other provinces. I don't have a title. So this is referred to as Jayavarman VII, and this is him depicted as Buddha, and we will talk more about Buddhism later. So he was a Khmer king. He was probably one of the most famous and powerful of the Khmer monarchs. He was also heavily influenced by his two wives who were also sisters, and he married one after the other's death. And he really was an important patron of Angkor Thom, which was one of the cities. And he was devoted to Buddhism, although his monument shows a mixture of Buddhist and Hindu iconography that we'll take a closer look at. So what you're looking at is a plan of Angkor Wat, and you really should look at it as a mandala. According to the ancient Sanskrit at Khmer texts, religious monuments and specifically temples must be organized in such a way that they are in harmony with the universe, meaning that the temple should be planned according to the rising sun and moon, in addition to symbolizing the recurrent time sequences of the days, months, and years. The central axis of these temples should be aligned with the planets, thus connecting the structure to the cosmos, so that temples become spiritual, political, cosmological, astronomical, and geophysical centers. They are, in other words, intended to represent microcosms of the universe and are organized as mandalas, diagrams of the universe. Angkor Wat today continues to play an important role in Cambodia, even though most of the population is now Buddhist. Since the 15th century, Buddhists have used the temple, and visitors today will see among um, thousands of visitors, Buddhist monks and nuns who worship at the site. Angkor Wat has also become an important symbol for the Cambodian nation. Today, the Cambodian flag is emblazoned on it the silhouette of Angkor Wat, so it includes a depiction of the temple or the lost temple. All right, so we're going to switch from architecture and look at some painting. We looked at a little bit of miniature style painting, which you're looking at now when we were studying Islamic art. Indians excelled at painting miniatures, illustrations done with watercolor on paper, used either to illuminate books or as individual leaves kept in an album. One of the most famous schools of Indian painting is the Rajput school, Rajput, which enjoyed illustrating Hindu myths and legends, especially the life of Krishna. Care is also lavished on individual portraits, which were done with immediacy and freshness. As in most Indian art, composition tends to be both crowded and colorful. Perspective is tilted upward so that the surface of the object, like the table or rugs, can be seen in their entirety. This is very similar to what we saw with North Renaissance art. You know, they did not use one point perspective the way Italian Renaissance artists did, but wanted to sort of tilt up um, the surface almost so that you could see everything because they were so detail oriented. And remember, North Renaissance artists were influenced by that sort of miniaturist tradition. Floral patterns contribute to the richness of expression. Figures are painted with great delicacy and generally seem small compared to the landscape around them. They have a doll-like character that adds to the fairy tale-like nature of the stories being illustrated. Characteristics of Indian painting include a heightened and intense use of color with black line outlining figures. Humans have a wide range of emotion. Figures often gesticulate wildly. Nature is seen as friendly and restorative. Few names of Indian artists have come down to us. The works are generally anonymous, even among the greatest masters. When Akbar, the third emperor of the Mughal dynasty, had no living heir at the age of 28, he consulted with a Sufi, an Islamic mystic, Sheikh Salim, who assured him a son would come soon. Soon after, when a male child was born, he was named Salim. Upon his ascent to the throne in 1605, Prince Salim decided to give himself the honorific title of Nur Uddin, or Light of Faith, and the name Jankahari, Seizure of the World. Jankahari is spelled Jahangir. And you can see it in the title there. In this miniature painting, Jankahari, preferring a Sufi sheikh to kings, you see flames of gold radiate from the emperor's head against a background of a larger, darker gold disc. A slim crescent moon hugs most of the disc's border, creating a harmonious fusion between the sun and the moon, thus day and night, and symbolizes the ruler's emperorship and divine truth. Jangohari is shown seated on an elevated, stone-studded platforms whose circular form mimics the disc above. The emperor is the biggest of the 5 human figures painted, and the disc with his halo, a visual manifestation of his title of honor, is the largest object in the painting. Dagahari faces four bearded men of varying ethnicity who stand in a receiving line format on a blue carpet embellished with arabesque flower designs and fanciful beast motifs. Almost on par with the emperor's level of the Sufi sheikh who accepts the gifted book, a hint of a smile brightening his face. Um, by engaging directly only with the sheikh, um, um, Jangahiri is making a statement about his spiritual leanings. Inscriptions in the cartouches on the top and bottom margins of the folio reiterate the fact that the emperor favors visitation with a holy man over an audience with kings. Below the sheikh and thus second in the hierarchical order of importance stands an Ottoman sultan. The unidentified leader, dressed in gold embroidered green clothing and a turban tied in a style that distinguishes him as a foreigner, looks in the direction of the throne, his hands joined in respectful supplication. The third standing figure awaiting a reception with the emperor has been identified as King James I of England. By his European attire, we see a plumed hat worn at a tilt, a pink cloak, a fitted skirt with a lace ruff, and elaborate jewelry. He appears distinctive. His unique frontal posture and direct gaze also make him appear indecorous and perhaps a little uneasy and uncomfortable. Last in line is Bircher, the artist responsible for this miniature, shown wearing an understated yellow yama, or robe, tied on his left, which indicates that he is a Hindu in service at the Mughal court, which Mughals were Islamic. A reminder that artists who created Islamic art were not always Muslim. This miniature folio was once part of an album, which would typically have alternating folios containing calligraphic text and painting. In all, 6 such albums are attributed to the ruler of Jangahir and his heir, Shah Jahan, but the folios, which vary greatly in subject matter, have now been widely dispersed over collections across the continent. During Mughal rule, artists were singled out for their special talent, some for their detailed work in botanical paintings, others for naturalistic treatment of fauna, while some artists were lauded for their calligraphic skills. In recent scholarship, Bircher's reputation is strong in formal portraiture, and within this category, his superior rendering of hand. Clear to the observer is the stark contrast between Jangahari's gem-studded wrist bracelets and finger rings and the sheikh's bare hands, the distinction between rich and poor, and the pursuit of material and spiritual endeavors. So this is similar, a cross current. Sometimes I think of these when I'm reading or learning about this stuff along with you, would be Vermeer's Venatus painting of the woman holding the scales. So that would be an interesting cross current to explore and compare. Um, Less clear is the implied difference to the emperor by the elderly sheikh's decision to accept the imperial gift not directly in his hands, but in his shawl, which you see right here, thereby avoiding physical contact with a royal personage, which would be a cultural taboo. A similar principle is at work in the action of the sultan, who presses his palms together in a respectful gesture. By agreeing to adopt the manner of greeting of the foreign country in which he is a guest, the Ottoman leader exhibits both respect and humility. King James's depiction is slightly more complex. Bircher based his image of the English monarch on a portrait by John de Creets, who is believed to have been given, which is believed to have been given to Jangahir by Sir Thomas Roe, the first English ambassador to the Mughal court. This was a way to cement diplomatic relations, and gifted items went both ways, east and west. In Bircher's miniature, only one of King James's hands can be seen, and it is worth noting that it has been positioned close to but not touching the hilt of his weapon. Typically at this time, portraits of European kings depicted one hand of the monarch resting on his hip and the other on his sword. Thus, we can speculate that Bircher deliberately altered the positioning of the king's hand to avoid an interpretation of a threat to his emperor. Um, Finally, the artist paints himself, holding a bordered miniature painting as though it were a prized treasure. You can see him towards the bottom of the composition. In this teeny painting within a painting, Bircher replicates his yellow yama, a man's robe, and perhaps to clarify his identity, and places himself alongside two horses and an elephant, which may have been imperial gifts. He shows himself bowing in the direction of his emperor in humble gratitude. To underscore his humility, Bircher puts his signature on the stool over which the emperor's feet would have stepped in order to take his seat. Beneath Jaghari's seat, crouching angels, we see them sort of crouching under the pedestal that he's on. There's an inscription, "O Shah, may the span of your life be 1,000 years." And so this is written in Persian at the base of what looks like an hourglass that makes up the pedestal of Janghari's throne. This reading is a clear allusion to the passage of time, but the putti figures, P-U-T-T-I, and this is borrowed from European iconography, suspended in midair towards the top of the painting, provide few clues as to their purpose or meaning. So this is more of a European. You see a lot of putti in Renaissance paintings. Facing away from the emperor, the putti on the left holds a bow with a broken string and a bent arrow, while the one on the right covers his face with his hands. Does he shield his eyes from the emperor's radiance, as some scholars believe, or as others suggest, he is crying because time is running out for the emperor, as represented in the slipping sand in the hourglass? Also cryptic is the many-headed kneeling figure that forms the base of Janghari's footstool. Questions remain as to who these auxiliary figures are and um, what they or their actions represent. Allegorical portraits were a popular painting genre among Janghari's court painters from 1615. To flatter their emperor, Janghari's artist portrayed him in imagined victories over rivals and enemies, or painted events reflecting imperial desire. Regardless of whether Janghari actually met the sheikh or was visited by a real Ottoman sultan, King James I certainly did not visit the Mughal court. Bircher has dutifully indulged his patron's desire to be seen as a powerful ruler in a position of superiority to other kings, but with a spiritual bent. While doing so, the artist has also cleverly taken the opportunity to immortalize himself. So we've seen that also in some Western paintings. And again, those are some cross currents that you might be able to make. So I'm going to stop here. And in our next segment, we're going to be talking about Buddhist art. So stay tuned.